welcome to the F1 paddock and welcome to your final Tech Talk instalment from Barcelona. I'm Rosanna Tennant, and joining me, as always, is F1's tech analyst, Sam Collins. And it's still light, we've still got cars out on track, and day three, there's still been plenty to talk about. What have you been getting close to today?
Well, it's what I haven't been getting close to. I haven't got close to the Alpine. I haven't got close to the Alfa Romeo, which I really wanted to do today. I haven't got close to the Alfa Tauri because they've all been, and I haven't got close to the Haas because they've all been broken in different ways.
Well, that sounds very disappointing, but I'm sure you found something to busy yourself with. Have there been parts still streaming into the paddock?
Streaming in and out, actually. I saw
Okay.
a Red Bull, just before we started filming this, a Red Bull floor disappeared.
There was a floor.
There was a floor, and that's floor spelled O-O-R, not A-W.
A few AWs, I reckon.
There are some AWs out there, a floor spelled error. Not just on the Red Bull, on a number of cars. Red Bull actually look all right. But Ferrari, they just fitted a new floor to their car for today's running, this afternoon actually, and it's got a little slot. They're still playing around with how to get the best out of their car. Yesterday, I only picked it up in the photos at the end of the day, so I only saw it overnight. Mercedes have been playing around with the cooling system on the car.
Slats, I saw.
Exactly,
Little gills.
They've got gills alongside the Halo exit, then they've cover those up, then open a big gill panel behind on the side of the engine cover, then close that up, and then sometimes run with, sometimes run out. They've been playing around on all sorts of things, and Joe Palmer, he pointed out to me something that was really obvious because I've been sat there and it's been going on next to me all day, but I didn't notice who it was. Mercedes is the only team that's been doing practice starts at the start of every single run, and I think that's a really fascinating little observation he made there. Not sure what that's about, but maybe there's an issue, or maybe that's something that's going to give them an advantage when the lights do go finally out in Bahrain.
It's almost like they're covering all bases, a real comprehensive few days here in Barcelona for them. We've been talking so much about how the cars have changed in terms of the actual car, but of course the tyres have changed this year as well, going from the 13-inch to the 18-inch rim. So lots of talk about that, but this afternoon as well we had wet weather running. Now you spoke to Mario Isola, didn't you? Let's hear what Mario Isola has had to say about these 3 days of running in Barcelona.
Mario Isola, after the first pre-season running of the new generation of Formula One cars here in Barcelona, what's your first impression of 2022 Formula One?
First of all, I have to say I'm quite happy because the first target was to confirm what we found during our tyre development test last year and the post-season test. Last year we were using mule cars, so we had some question marks like the aero package that is not the same, like the wheel cover, the heat transfer between the brake and the rim. So it was important to have a first feeling of that. It is quite positive. Comments were in line with what we found last year. Now we have a lot of data to analyze. Teams were focused mostly on C2 and C3 because they were focused on the car setup and balance and to understand how the car behaves. But I believe that we have a good information.
Now, you mentioned about the data you've got to go through. There was meant to be some wet weather data. We did wet the track here. There weren't many cars that took to the track in the rain. Is that going to hold you back a little?
Yeah, that was an opportunity that we decided to give to the teams because I feel that with such a big change in tires and the car, it was not right to face the first wet condition without having tested the wet or the intermediate first. So we asked the circuit to use as many tanks as they had, and they had 6, I believe. So in 1 hour time, they put as much water as they can, and we had something similar to full wet condition. Also to evaluate the crossover time between wet and intermediate to slick. The crossover time is really important to be sure that there is an overlay between two products and not a gap, because a gap is dangerous. You don't have any tire that is suitable for that condition, and we want to avoid that.
Now, you've had a chance, you've got a unique insight into all of the different cars up and down the pit lane, what they're like on track now. You've seen them in the wet, in shakedowns, you've seen them in the dry and the artificial wet here.
Yeah.
What are you expecting in terms of the pace of the cars for this season?
I have to say that looking at the first lap time, also the first day, they were better than expected, because now we are 1.5 seconds slower than the best lap time during the race. I believe that nobody is pushing too much. I believe that they have still a lot of potential. So the pace will be, for the race weekend, quite interesting, especially because now the tires are designed with a different philosophy in mind with the drivers that can push, because the new compounds are designed to have less degradation, less overheating, a wider working range, and especially with the new aero package you can follow another car without losing the downforce. That means that there is no requirement to manage too much the race pace. That's why I believe that probably in some cases it will be interesting to see the race pace in some circuits, especially on high-speed circuit or circuit with high-speed corners, because this new package is working quite well on high speed.
Great to hear from Mario Isola. I know you always like catching up with Mario on a race weekend, but nice to spend a little bit of time off the race weekends to talk to him. And he told me after you'd spoken to him that the winter break was very busy because this has been a huge overhaul, and now it's going to be really busy because there's loads of data to go through for them.
Yeah, I mean, all of this data from all of the cars, all 10 cars that have been running, including the ones that have gone a bit broken as well, it's all 5 tyres, plus the intermediate, plus the wet that have had some track time. The wet and the intermediate didn't get that much track time, but some teams tested at Silverstone, so they got wet anyway. That data's all going to go back to Pirelli in Milan. They're going to look at what the tyres have done. They're going to start working out what the tyre pressures need to be for the races. They need to start to understand how the teams can use them. But also, for the Pirelli, it's more about what the sort of limits of those tyres are going to be, finding out how long a stint can go. One thing Mario did say in that interview, which I thought was really interesting, it's really promising for the races as well, was that basically the drivers don't need to do so much tyre management. They can lean on them all the way through, but then they're just going to need to change them. So it's that point of, well, we've pushed it really far and now we need to change them. That little step change could be quite exciting in a race if a car suddenly halfway around a lap goes, tyres aren't working anymore, now I'm going to go slow and everybody's going to attack me. And these new cars should be really attackable.
Wow, it's going to be so interesting to watch how the race strategies play out. And of course, it's going to be interesting to see how the drivers deal with these new tyres. Mercedes last year, how would you have rated their tyre management skills, and how do you think that's going to play into their hands this year?
Mercedes were really good last year at keeping their tyres alive for a long stint, and that gave them a big strategic advantage over their main title rival Red Bull. But Red Bull was much better at getting temperature into the tyres on a single lap, so in qualifying they were much stronger, and on an outlap Red Bull were much stronger. And that you saw that playing through the race season, and that led to some slightly unpredictable situations in the races. However, everything shifted this year, and I think, well, that bit of tyre knowledge will still have some relevance. Don't expect it to be the same way around this year. Everything could be reversed.
Oh, I like a bit of that. And of course, we need to talk about Ferrari and McLaren as well, and so many other teams now in the mix, with Ferrari struggling a bit with tyres last year, so perhaps it'll all change for 2022. Going back to Mercedes, though, you spoke to Mike Elliott, the team's technical director. Let's hear what he had to say ahead of the 2022 season.
Mike Elliott, Mercedes AMG Petronas Formula One team technical director. You're one of the key people responsible for the creation of this new and very different Formula One car. Can you tell us how you started the project and where you really started with this completely new concept?
Well, I guess if you sort of look at it, the biggest change for this year has been aerodynamics, and so there's always going to be a challenge of trying to work out how you deal with these changing regulations. So as always, what you do is you start with a car in the wind tunnel, you look at what's changed in the flow field, what you can learn from that, how you can recover some of the structures you've had in the past, also what new opportunities there are in the regulation. So that's where you really start. And then combined with the work of the vehicle dynamicists and sort of overseen by our chief designer, we then gradually piece together what we think is the best way of putting the car together.
Something I've noticed on a number of different cars up and down the pit lane in this pre-season running and in the launches as well, including on your car, is the design of the side pods, both internally and externally. They seem to be very, very different in terms of what the teams are trying to achieve, or how they're trying to go about it at least. Can you tell me what you're trying to do, and then what in general you think is happening in that area of the car?
Well, I guess there are different concepts. In terms of what's happened with these regulations, we've completely changed the way you're managing the wheel wake, and that was done to try and make it better for overtaking, that we couldn't sort of over-optimise and control the tyre flows, and then for that to break down behind another car. And different teams have taken different approaches to that. Some teams have gone for these big wide bodyworks, sort of trying to control the tyre weight that way, and we've gone for a narrower solution. And we've packaged the car to be able to do that. But I think it's, the reality is the cars will evolve a lot between now and race one. and you'll see different solutions come along. I think in terms of what the details of the aerodynamics are doing, it's probably all to do with controlling that front tyre wake.
Something that's quite different to previous seasons and every previous Mercedes of recent years is the fact that this season you're not allowed to use hydraulic suspension, front or rear. And I'm wondering what the implications of that have been for your car this year. Have you had to relearn everything how to use mechanical suspension?
It's probably less relearning of mechanical suspension, and in fact there's two changes in the rules. There's one which is a ban of hydraulic suspension, and there's another which is a ban of inerters, which is a way of damping the accelerations. So I think if you start with the hydraulics, and it's really a big change in packaging. In the hydraulic systems, you're able to package the springs remotely from the suspension, and that's quite a nice thing to be able to do with the car. When you go to a mechanical system, it's all got to be located on the rear suspension in the gearbox, for instance. In terms of the inerters, that's just changing the way you're damping the car, and obviously that has an impact in terms of what we can do and how we deal with that.
This might be again to do with the front wheel wake around the car, but something we are seeing a huge lack of engineering consensus on all of these cars is the design of the floors. And the floor edge, we've seen all sorts of slots and cuts, and of course your own ripple floor, which harks back to a concept we first really saw in early 2021. Please tell us, what is going on here?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, it's less about wheel wake. That's more about dealing with the sort of the edge condition of the floor. You know, these cars have got sort of profiled undersides, back to the full ground effect cars of, I guess, 1980s sort of time. We don't have the skirts, but what we are trying to do is control the edge condition of the floor, and because you've got a big pressure change from the upper surface to the lower surface, you tend to form quite a strong vortex on that lower surface, and it's about how you manage that. But again, I think we'll just see different approaches, and people will learn as we develop.
Something we've seen on a number of cars, including yours, is a little bit of porpoising, the car's bouncing up and down. What can you do to stop that effect?
I mean, ultimately, this is a learning game. Formula One is always a learning game, whether it's about the development of the car or it's about dealing with the issues we find. I think you're right. I think we've seen it pretty much up and down the grid, and I think if you, even the cars you're seeing less of it, you'll see that they're managing it in terms of the way they're dealing with their end of straights, how they're using DRS, etc. So I think it's a problem that we're all facing. The reality is we've just got to learn as quickly as we can. We're doing as much testing as we can here. We'll do a lot of simulation work back in the factory, and it will be about how we either solve that or how we sort of deal with it and mitigate it in the first races.
Something that's fascinated me about the job that you're doing, particularly at the moment, over all of last year when you were developing this new and very different Formula One car, you were also fighting a World Championship battle that went right down to the wire at the final race. How did you manage the development of a car for a new season and a new rulebook compared to a car that you still needed to win a championship without sacrificing the performance of either?
With a deal of difficulty is probably the easy answer. I mean, I think, it's just one of the things you face. It's part of the challenges that are there, and you're making those decisions as you go through the season. We took risks with last season. We didn't develop to the end because we knew if we did, we'd be in a difficult place this year. So yeah, it's a difficult balance. The fact we have less runs than the other teams have, that's just another challenge we face. And as engineers, we like that challenge. We'll see how we get on come the first race.
Every year I ask everybody something fairly similar to this, and this time I'm going to ask you, if you could name one single element of another car, one of your competitors' cars, that's really stood out to you as interesting or effective or something you want to take a closer look at, what would it be?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, I haven't spent an awful lot of time looking at the other cars. We're just trying to solve our own issues, and the guys in the factory are doing more of that. I guess the most visually different thing is the sort of the side pod that Red Bull have come up with. Looks interesting. We'll go away and have a think about that, but hopefully that answers your question.
It does indeed. Mike, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest
You're
of
welcome.
the pre-season running.
Yeah, thank you.
Over the course of the 3 days here in Barcelona, it's been difficult to get much out of the teams, the team principals, the drivers. We've all spoken to a range of people. Mike being a little bit cagey there, but we've noticed those sort of ripples on the floor, and you've been focusing on the floor quite a lot this week. What did you really get from that chat from him?
Well, I could tell he didn't really want to give me too many secrets about the car, and that's normal, but some of the teams are being more cagey than normal, because when you got towards 2021, everybody sort of knew what there was to know about that generation of cars. This year, it's quite clear looking at the cars, nobody really knows anything. They think they know something, look at the other team's cars and go, oh, we don't know anything. So somebody's got something wrong, we don't know who it is. And Mike was being quite cagey, but he did say, well, he did sort of reinforce my little theory that a lot of these floor treatments, the wobbly floor on the Mercedes and the slots and cuts that other teams are using, are all to do with sort of creating sort of vortexes along the side of the floor and just keep the different pressure areas of the floors together and stop that different pressure bleeding out from under the floor and just sealing the side. And so I call that invisible skirts, which isn't anything to do with clothing, by the way. It's aerodynamics. It takes us back to the ground effect days, but those invisible skirts, if you can get that working consistently and reliably, you will get an enormous boost in downforce, and that's what the teams are trying sort of to do. Though Mike played that one down a little bit. He didn't like it when I called them invisible skirts.
Well, you mustn't do that again. What you will do again, I'm sure many times this season, is talk about ground effect. Of course, Formula 1 going back to that sort of era now. We've been talking a lot about porpoising as well this week. Cars sort of jumping up and down, back and forth a little bit as they mainly along the straights. You spoke to Ross Brawn this week as well and sat down with him. Of course, he's been instrumental in pushing through these new rules and regulations for the sport. A little taster, a little teaser of what we're about to hear from him.
Yeah, well, you've got to remember that Ross has been in motorsport for just forever, basically, and he's worked not just in Formula 1. He's worked in different eras of Formula 1, but he's also worked in American racing, he's worked in Le Mans, in sports car racing, and that's where you've got these big flaws on the cars. And in sports car racing, porpoising isn't that unusual. It's something teams have learnt to deal with. So some of the engineers who are a little bit maybe greyer of hair, shall we say.
The old school.
Well, exactly. I found a grey hair the other day, hated it. and those engineers will have a bit more of an idea how to deal with this problem. But yeah, it's just interesting to hear what he says about it. So,
well, let's have a good old listen to Formula 1's Ross Brawn.
Ross, it's your first chance to have seen all of these new 10 beautiful new Formula 1 cars for this new generation of Formula 1. What are your first thoughts looking at each of these cars?
Very pleased. I think, considering the substantial change in the regulations, I think the fact the cars are run with relatively few problems. It's too early to say, but they're all within a reasonable gap. There's no one outstanding. We've got some time before we can assess that, and I think until we get to Bahrain race, we won't see the true order. But I'm very pleased. Cars look great on the track. Feedback we've had from the drivers is positive, so I think it's as good as it could be.
Just looking at these cars, what are those bits that have jumped out of it that almost took you by surprise, that you didn't anticipate?
I think if you look at the Ferrari, it's very extreme. There's some very deeply sculptured side pods. There's a lot of interesting detail on the sides of the floor. There's a huge number of solutions in terms of the detail on the edge of the floor. I don't think any of it is damaging the fundamental characteristic of the car. But I've said this many times, the working group that was put together to design this car will continue working. They'll now have access to the data, they'll have access to the designs, and they'll be evaluating if any of these designs are moving in the wrong direction, and then we'll nudge it back again. Because I really think, from talking to some of the drivers, that they're seeing and they're appreciating the difference in the ability of this car to follow another car.
You've experienced this phenomenon known as porpoising before, and you know how to deal with it. So tell us, how do you get away from this porpoising phenomenon that we're seeing on these cars?
Well, in terms of my career and Pat's career in Formula 1, a lot of these engineers are quite wet behind the ears. And they will never have had to face that problem before, but we've all experienced it. And it's still prevalent. It's a phenomenon, it's physics. And it's still prevalent in lots of formulae. They have it in sports cars. They can have it in any sort of single-seater where there's a large dependency on ground effect. So I'm a little surprised some of them have been caught out by it, because I thought they would have anticipated it from their wind tunnel work. But you can see on the track some people have already come to terms with it. So there's solutions out there. I think where they will face a challenge is I suspect the solutions may be coming back on performance a little bit, and that the strongest performance may put them closer to the edge. But that's a decision for the team to make on how they set the car up. But there's lots of formulae now which have to balance that difference. And if it ever becomes a problem, I'm sure the FIA can find some tweaks to the underside to reduce the sensitivity.
Now, looking forward to Bahrain for F1 testing in the first race of the year and the rest of the 2022 season, what are your hopes for this new era of Formula One?
Well, my main hope is that the drivers are able to benefit from the concept of these cars, which is the ability to follow. You know, when we've been doing our studies, we've had this what we call overtaking margin, the lap time difference you have to have in order to be able to execute a normal overtake on a circuit. And a lot of circuits, that's been 1.5 to 2 seconds. Now, you never get down to a few tenths, but if we can get down to 3/4 of a second or a second, we've made a big difference. And I think the other thing that the drivers suffered with the old cars was as soon as you followed, your tyres started to deteriorate, because your car was so impacted by following another car that your tyres started to deteriorate, and it became a compound problem. Not only were you losing performance, but your tyres were degrading much more quickly. So what I want to see is that we've improved that situation. If we've improved that situation, then the natural evolution and development of the cars will bring them closer together. There's no doubt when you have new regulations, there's a chance the cars will move apart. But as long as we have achieved that ability and characteristic to follow each other, I don't mind, because the cars will come back together again. So as long as we've achieved that, and we'll see that in the first few races, then I'll be happy.
Great to hear from Ross, and I think so much anticipation ahead of the 2022 season. And interestingly, him mentioning Ferrari being the ones to watch in terms of their car that they've brought to Barcelona.
Yeah, I mean, he's got some form at Ferrari as well, hasn't he? So I think it's really interesting to see that he's picked that car out as the one that surprised him of what they've done with the regulations. And Ross he's not prone to overstatement, is he? So I think he's really eyes raised on that. And Ferrari, for me, is the team to watch.
Well, of course, we're going to pack up here in Barcelona. In 2 weeks, we'll move to Bahrain for the official test. These 3 days really have been track running, kind of learning about the reliability of the parts that they've brought. And then are we going to see performance runs straight out of the box in Bahrain?
I think we are from some cars, Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes, some of them. Those cars are looking all right, but some of the teams have actually had genuine reliability issues. So we've seen that with Haas. I think the Haas has got a lot more pace to come, and I think you'll see some surprises there. Ferrari, I said they're going to be quick out the box. Mercedes also quick out the box. Aston Martin, they've been struggling. Alpine, though, they're interesting. Alpine basically found a problem at the rear of the car. They solved it this morning, started setting some quick laps, and then had a massive technical failure in the power unit, and that was the end of their weekend. So they do not know how quick they can go in Bahrain, but they think it's very, very fast indeed. Well,
I'm sure there's going to be a lot of head scratching between now and Bahrain. Plenty of data to go through. I know, Sam, you will be looking at it as well. When we meet again in Bahrain for the official test, there's going to be so much to look at. Join us again for Tech Talk when we head to the desert.